This is the Racial Equity and Policing Commission Policy and Practice Subcommittee meeting, Wednesday, December 16th. This meeting will be an electronic meeting pursuant to the Core Commission determination that conducting the meeting at a physical location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. The subcommittee meeting will not have a physical location and all attendees will connect remotely. This meeting is conducted by me, Josh King, a member of the Commission Facilitation Team, the Langdon Group. And further information can be found on the city's website at slc.gov/boards/racial-equity-in-in policing-commission/. With that very informal introduction, thank you for attending today's meeting. I appreciate it. Always good to be with you guys. We are scheduled to go to 5 o'clock. So let's jump into it. Mr. Cottrell will be joining us shortly, and I believe has to leave at 4:30, but wanted to come and address a couple of the questions that were posed at the last meeting and follow up on those. Just to review the upcoming schedule, after today's meeting, we will be off for the next couple weeks for the holidays and reconvene on January 6th with a full commission meeting. On January 13th, we'll have a listening session with the public, and over the next couple days, weeks certainly, we'll be launching the website, making live the text line and the phone line, opening up the survey, and going forth with that. You should expect to see more information on that tomorrow, I believe. And so Larry gave an update last week and just wanted to let you know where we are with that. It's all been tested, and I think we're ready to go live on that, and you should see that tomorrow, and engagement on that with the commission. So before we move on, any questions about that, or questions about the timeline and the process? All right. Sherry, welcome to the meeting. Good to have you. All right. Okay, since Mr. Cottrell is not on yet, we'll come back to that. But as we discussed last time, I wanted to spend this time, have a discussion with the subcommittee on moving forward. We've had a few weeks of information gathering, Q&A, opportunity to hear from various experts, and wanted to get your thoughts on that, how it's been. I also wanted to state that I think the expectation isn't that you as commission members become experts on the subject matter or on the policies or the practices or the law before you make recommendations. I don't think there are enough Wednesdays in the year, this year or next, to fully understand and dive deep, but want you to know that your questions have been pertinent. I hope that they've provided you enough information that you have some takeaways or gained some insights. And I think the hope is that we can use that to draft some intents or move in a direction. And so that's what I wanted to ask you commission members. As you reflect back on those meetings, what are your takeaways? Any key insights, anything that came to mind that you appreciate from having those meetings? Commissioner Kuhn.
I think I should probably be candid. I don't know. I think these meetings have been enlightening in some ways, but frustrating in other aspects. Um, I'm honestly like willing to become like a quasi expert in SOCPD policy and even a little bit of case law if I need to. But I think where a lot of the issue lies is the procedures by which policies come about and the like rigidity in those procedures is has been what's been kind of like the thorn in my side. And I've just been wondering a lot about how much can we actually do as a commission as it pertains to policy. Because like at SOCPD's policy manual, it's already more restrict than, or it's more, or it's stricter than say like what preceding case law um, calls for. It's certainly more so than the Constitution. But if we were to suggest that it's all good and it's enough, then we wouldn't have this subcommittee. So obviously more needs to be done, but at the end of the day, my worry is that if the underlying case law is not going to be sufficient, then how much progress are we really making? Because even the SOCPD policies, they have to be constructed in a way that is like kind of tied back to courts and whatnot. And so I don't know. There's still like loopholes, and even if we were to close some of those loopholes, like will we still have made a significant amount of progress in protecting the communities we represent?
And so if I hear you right, Commissioner, I guess through this process has been informative, yet has left you wondering about whether the implementation of the procedures and the policy will effectuate any real change.
Definitely. I think that's a really accurate summarization. And I think the only thing I would add to that is just I I am wondering even how much as a subcommittee can we even actually implement, like what is the scope and locus of control and influence.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So I mean, we can dive into that. I want to ask you more about that if it's okay with the rest of the commission. Um, I think you bring up a good point. So if, I guess, tell me more about the implementation, like living in this community, from you're a leader, you're a leader in the city, at the university, you're involved in a lot of things, right? Um, so what should be different now than what you've seen in the past?
I I think that where my like biggest concerns have always lied has been within like areas of use of force and like so like my like maybe not curiosities but like a lot of my focus has been on like how can we mitigate or even potentially prevent some of these incidents because they always disproportionately affect people of color and specifically black people. Oh, sorry, getting a call, but I can ignore it. But I think especially in that area of use of force, I'm just kind of worried about how easy it is to justify a lot of these past instances, because the wording is, you know, kind of open and almost demands subjectivity. And I understand why subjectivity is important, but I think we're at a point where the community and the department are operating on two different planes of subjectivity and just norms of and expectations of what exactly is reasonable or acceptable. And so I think I would just like for a lot of these policies to be more reflective of what the community might consider reasonable or acceptable.
Good. And I've heard that. And so today I was reviewing the minutes from the last meetings, trying to pull out some key themes, and I saw that throughout from you and others. And it was that goal or the aspiration of finding ways to eliminate the disconnect between what an officer or department thinks is reasonable versus what the community thinks is reasonable. And so I'd ask the rest of the commission if a takeaway from these meetings is that uh, a worthy, I guess, recommendation and something we pursue moving forward to look at that disconnect and provide some recommendations moving forward on how to bridge that chasm. And I'm not asking you that we need to now, but is that a worthy goal? What do you, Carol, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I agree with every single thing Commissioner Coombs said. It's, um, I thought that's why we started this commission, was to look at the disconnect and to make changes. But I don't see that that's gonna happen because the system is in place. And it's almost as though whenever we address an issue, we hear about what the law is. The law is already in place. The system is already in place. And no one's going to budge um, to change that system. I understand when you've been dealing with years of a system being the way it is, it's hard to make change, but it's also hard for people to accept the fact that these are realities that are harming families, that are hurting people. And, you know, it's not going to do us any good if you keep coming back with, but this is the law, but this is the system. So I agree. It's very, very frustrating. I feel like we're not moving anywhere. We're not getting anywhere. I understand that we need to learn the law and we need to understand, but maybe we need to relook at everything. Or not we, that's what we're trying to do. So I think there's resistance to change. And I don't know if we're going to get anywhere with it.
All right. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Stephen, do you want to add to that? Do you have anything to add to what Commissioner Cume and Shiflett said?
Uh, Again, I totally agree with Commissioner Kuhn. I can't say it as elegantly as he said it, but I mean, it doesn't seem like we can make any change unless the law changes. And that's where it starts. And when we go back and look at the preparation of that language, I mean, I know it's not any of us writing that. So how do we get in a position where we can affect change in the writing or the rewriting of the law? Because like Carol pointed out, I mean, there's a resistance to change. And it's frustrating because I don't know where we start to get a change in that law. I mean, policy, yeah, I mean, you could suggest on policy all day, but the real piece of it is the law. How do we affect change on that?
Yeah, and as Commissioner Hume said, and as we've talked about, you know, there is the case law. The city can implement policy that requires more than case law, and we heard from Mr. Cottrell on that. And so it sounds like the, there are questions and trust around the implementation and application of that law within the city. You 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 feel it, you see it, you know when there's that disconnect, right? And you've shared a little bit what aspirationally you'd like to see, right? And so maybe the focus is honing in on that implementation piece. And I know you've kind of dug into that a little bit and we've talked about it. There's some great, there was some good discussion around use of force and that disconnect piece that we talked about and why that exists. And you asked for some data and on the recruitment and maybe that implementation piece is where we need to focus on. Then I had a couple more questions along those lines and wanted to dig in and ask you guys about the potential of those, but I see Mr. Cottrell's on the line and I know he has a timeline, so wanted to give him a minute to respond to a couple of the questions you had, and then we can let him go and get back to our discussion. Mr. Cottrell.
Thank you, Josh. Commissioners, thanks for having me again. Apologies, I was late. I got pulled into something right before this meeting began. But I know that there were some questions that you were hopeful to ask me. Hopefully I can answer them, or if I can't, I can at least figure out who could or how to answer them. So certainly I'm at your service right now.
Okay, so do you want, I guess I'll pose the questions that were in the minutes and then on the agenda. Yeah, and you can respond to those. I know MJ, at least one of them up, he's not on, but let's just address it. Commissioner Hume is on, I think it came from the subcommittee. Sorry, let me pull up the agenda here. Was the decision not to charge the officer filmed pushing someone over based on victim declining to press charges? Question mark. Is that policy?
So, okay, good question. The short answer to that, no. Departmental policy, Salt Lake City Police Department policy, has no effect on whether a prosecutor, either with the county district attorney's office or with the state attorney general office, the federal U.S. attorney's office, or I guess even a local city prosecutor, whether they decide to charge, right? Policy only affects the behavior of the officer in the course and scope of their employment. Whether that policy is violated or not violated is independent of the question of whether a crime was committed. Now, oftentimes the analysis might be similar, but so the decision about whether to charge is a wholly independent decision made. And so I think that in this particular matter, the DA, the Salt Lake County District Attorney, Sim Gill, they issued a letter explaining their reasons why they decided not to charge. But yeah, short answer, policy does not and should not have any effect on how a independent prosecutor should proceed with the case. And if you might remember the chart that we discussed last week, there were the different lanes of, in the road about who does what. And in this particular case that we're discussing here, that would be a situation where it's in the criminal lane, right? Whether the DA is deciding to charge, and the analysis about whether policy was violated was on the other side of that chart. So I hope that answers the question. As for why they didn't charge, I think you would have to either read the letter and speak with the DA about that.
Okay, the second question is it possible, I guess, any follow-up questions from the subcommittee to Mr. Cottrell on that one?
Where might we be able to find that letter?
I think it was publicly posted. They usually post their written decisions on their website on a link involving press. And if I can find it, I'll try to shoot that link over to you guys before I take off.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, anyone else? Okay, the second question, Mark, is it possible for those over 21 to be able to sign an NDA to have access to more information? For example, in the context of the canine violations as a broader part of the commission's work. And so I think that came from some questions about the responses to data requests being a little vague, and so the commission was wondering if that might be a possibility to get additional access to data and information by signing an NDA or doing something different. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure what happened with my internet connection. I got to the point where you're asking the question about an NDA, and then it cut out.
Yeah, so is it possible for those over 21 to be able to sign an NDA to have access to more information as a broader part of the commission's work?
So I guess I'm going to give you the typical Weasley lawyer answer, and that is it depends. And I say that not to be facetious, but I guess I would probably need to know a little more information about what is being sought. And when I think about getting access to information, the thing that primarily comes to my mind is the tool of GRAMA, right? Utah's public records law, Government Records Access Management Act. And what that is supposed to do is facilitate requests from members of the public to get records from governmental entities and to facilitate it that way. However, as I've learned in my 6 years of practicing in municipal law, there are provisions in GRAMA that prevent release of records depending on certain stages and what kind of records there are, right? And so a lot of it depends on what you're seeking, and based on what you're seeking, there may be different avenues for obtaining those records. And so maybe the commissioners wanted to sort of kind of talk to me about what records you're looking for, generally, specific, et cetera. It might help me kind of formulate the best way of approaching it or obtaining those records.
Yeah, so I'll pose it to the commission members here. Information requests that have been made. Well, I guess one, related to that, do you feel like you've received what you've asked for? Is there something additional that would relate to this? And two, is there information not requested yet, but that we might want to request that would relate to this?
We might want to see if there's a way to hear from MJ about it. I feel like this might have been his original question. I can't quite remember, but I know he was at some point interested in the canine violations, and so if there's a way for us to get his take on it somehow.
Okay, yeah, certainly I can follow up with the MJ. Thank you. Ephraim, any other questions? Okay. All right, those are the two questions we had for you, Mark. And so any other questions for Mark while we have him?
And I'll say this, I can hang for another 10 minutes before I have to run out, and I apologize for leaving early. But if something pops up in the next 10, I'm around to try to answer or give you the Weasley lawyer answer of it depends. So
Yeah, so let me just follow up. Just, I know, oh, David popped up, and is that to show a face, David, or something to say?
No, I never just show my face. I try and protect all of you from that. Josh, I just wanted to mention on the non-disclosure agreement question. This also came up in the training subcommittee. There was some information that the training subcommittee requested, and about some interview questions as a part of recruitment of officers. And some of that information is copyrighted. And so our team of attorneys and mayor's office staff and police department are meeting. I want to say it didn't get scheduled until the first part of the new year, but we have a meeting scheduled to try and work through some of those concerns about whether it's confidential information or copyrighted information, and how we can maybe work through that to make sure that the commissioners are getting the information that they need to make informed recommendations and to have discussion. So some of that conversation is happening as well to make sure that we can tackle some of the barriers.
Yeah, thank you, David. That sounds similar to what I've heard. And I think those might be the same questions, interview questions we asked for. And I think Commissioner Shiflett made that request or mentioned that. So I appreciate that. One thought was, and I think it came from MJ, might this commission have the same access to information and data as, say, the Citizen Review Board? And how might that happen? So it goes beyond just GRAMA and what the public would do, but more similar to like Citizen Review Board.
Great. That I appreciate that. We can definitely go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
yeah, no, I'm sorry, David. I could take a stab at that based on my involvement with the passage of the CRB ordinance that occurred last week. This was a topic of discussion, and so I think that I can maybe explain that topic of discussion. It might illuminate sort of how the CRB is able to have more access than the commission at this point. So the CRB, there's an ordinance enacted that empowers the CRB to essentially act like internal affairs, but outside the department, right? Non-PD people, independent investigator, not housed in PD. And they have, well, now, I don't know what criteria they're using before, but as of the ordinance change now, CRB board members and the investigator all have to pass what's called a BCI background check. BCI is the Bureau of Criminal Investigation for the state of Utah, and they're the ones who do all the background checks for most entities, right? That seek it. I had to go through a BCI check. My colleagues did who go to the police department, and the BCI background check. There are certain criteria where people will be automatically disqualified, but there are but if for example, if they have a felony conviction within a certain time frame, that may disqualify them temporarily until enough time passes, then they are then eligible to pass a background check. So that's some of the criteria that they put forth. But once that background check is passed, that person can be a member of the CRB board, and they can then have access to the information that, for example, Internal Affairs has, police reports, active open investigations, certain sensitive information, etc. Why is that important? Why do they have to pass a background check? Well, the reason is this. In order, all law enforcement agencies in the state have to comply with state regulations and state laws about accessing that information. And they all have to enter into contracts with the state that they will abide by the terms and the rules by which that information is provided. If they don't follow those rules, and the state would kick them off, and they wouldn't then have access to all of this information they use, etc. So that's a long way of saying that the CRB board is able to get information perhaps that the commission isn't privy to right now because they are able to pass background checks. So,
Yeah, anything else? Sorry, Mark.
no. And I guess the question that you guys might next ask is, well, is there anything we can do to be on the same level as CRB? And I think that would require some investigation on our end to see if that can happen, I guess.
Yeah, and that was my question to the commission, if that is a recommendation that you want to make to, for the city to grant access to the commission, access to data and information at that level, or a level comparable or possible to maybe facilitate the exchange of information and data that is more questionable.
I personally would like that. I think yeah, I think that would be something that could potentially enable us to affect more change.
All right. Stephen, Carol. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
No, please go ahead.
All right. Stephen, Carol.
I believe that would be something I'd be interested in. I don't know why we would have the commission, and I mean, they didn't start out with the intent to access that authority. I mean, if they're expecting a true recommendation, we would need to access some of that information.
Yeah. And again, there are phases here, and we have, this is just the first phase, and maybe something that both subcommittees identified as a need, right? You're not going to become experts, but data is important to help in your decision making. And if this is a recommendation that you feel can be made, and if granted, then enhances your ability to assess implementation of policies, hiring, discipline, training, then that might be a very important recommendation to make at this stage.
You present it so well, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
I've known Josh a long time. That might be the first time I've heard that about Josh, but I'm just kidding.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So yeah, Mark, I think that's helpful. I think we can craft a recommendation around that. And sounds like the training subcommittee might have something similar. So yeah, go ahead.
And the thing I would think about is you're crafting this, the request here is, and I don't think I know the right answer today, or I try to give a better answer, is what is the information that is truly BCI protected versus what is the information that isn't? And what about that BCI protected information is critical and important to the commission's function? And right now, I can't honestly think of too much or give a good definition of what is BCI protected information other than some examples of things that I've seen which might be, and it may be entirely relevant and critical to the commission's function. But I think it may be important to at least have a discussion with the department about what they consider BCI protected and what isn't. And if it's not protected, what is that information? Because you might be able to get it more readily and more quickly than going through, this other process. And so maybe that's another point to raise with the department to talk about all of that.
Yeah, and that I think if we put forth our intent, maybe that's something the attorneys, staff can work on. So I think the intent is, it's been articulated. Yeah, there are policies that go beyond what courts and case law requires, and so Ephraim mentioned like the trust and the implementation of that is important, and understanding that if they're to believe, like, yeah, the policies go beyond what courts and case law require, it might be helpful to see the data of, like, that bears that out. And I don't know what that information request would look like, but yeah, I don't know if we can facilitate that exchange where the Salt Lake City Police Department feels more confident or can more readily provide it to the commission, that might be helpful.
And I feel like this would have been a great opportunity for someone like Rick Rasmussen, who was here last week, where he could have probably explained the difference, like what he's able to access versus what he isn't with that BCI clearance. So, okay. I, Josh, I'm guessing your team would be formulating an ask to the department on that.
Yeah, I think I understand the intent, and Dante's subcommittee seems to be in the same position we are, and so we make the recommendation on, well, I think it'd go from our subcommittee and his to the full commission, and then to the city. That's how I understand it. So we'll craft it in a way that meets the intent and has the most likelihood of succeeding moving forward.
And I do apologize, commissioners. I do have to run. I thank you for the few minutes you allowed me to have with you today. If there's anything else, please, I guess, facilitate it through Josh or Coletta, and they can certainly put me on notice of any other additional questions you guys may have. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, so just relating to that discussion and going back to our earlier discussion, yeah, I've sensed that, I know for a fact that, because we talked about this in our first meeting, that goals are to make recommendations or effectuate change related to policies that negatively impact our communities, right? And that lead to better outcomes. We had the discussion about case law and then about city policy that can go beyond the case law. So what do you feel like you need to help you move forward to be able to feel like you're making progress, empowered to make progress, and effectuating that change that you hope for and hoped for when this process started? Carol?
A while ago in one of the earlier meetings, I said we need to do an internal survey of what's going on inside of the police department. I think that until you understand where a person is racially, and of course people will say, oh, I'm not a racist. That just, that you hear that often. But if you do an internal survey like the one that I sent and everyone's agreed that they like it, then I think that gives you a measure. I'm hoping people would be honest. Once you do that, you've got to start talking about racism. You can't just jump to the conclusion of how we're going to change policy and procedure if you don't know what the problem is. Now, the governor put out that message. Did anybody see it yesterday? Unveils a new Utah Compact committing to anti-racist actions. You really have to start with the work before you can start making changes. I don't know if anybody saw that, and I can put the link in the chat, but there's a whole lot of work to do, but you got to start with what you got. What do you have? Who is thinking what in-house? And it doesn't matter if someone had said, well, but Carol, it's kind of telling if you have all white law enforcement officers and you get this particular survey and you have some black law enforcement officers. It just because you're black doesn't mean that you think that everything is wonderful or everything is bad just because you're white. That's a big assumption. So I really think that you've got to start with that in-house survey first before we can go anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And so I guess my follow-up, Carol, would be, assuming that's done, what would your hope be what would the outcome be? What do you hope the outcome would be from that? And then how could we leverage that?
Well, I think if you know who you're working with and what you're working with, then you can implement a training um, that addresses the real issue. Um, I don't know how the training team can move forward if they don't know who. How can you put something together if you don't know what you're putting together? You've
Yeah.
got to implement. You've got to get questions together to say, where are you on the scope of racism, of police brutality? Do you agree? Do you not agree? Some people may agree. Some people, I know there's a training going on right now with Highway Patrol. And there are people who believe that what happened to George Floyd was justified. So just getting a measure of that alone helps to move the training forward, to move policy forward. It'll give you a picture of, okay, this is what we need to relook at in policy change and make those changes. Stop resisting the change.
All right, great. So that, and I remember and appreciate you sharing that survey, and might be a recommendation that we make to the commission, and um, bring it up in full commission meeting and see if other subcommittees have talked about it, how it might be valuable to them. Any other thoughts on that survey or that recommendation? All right, good. I've noted that, Commissioner Shiflett, um, and we'll put that together. Stephen, what are your thoughts? What is it that you feel like is needed to take the next step forward? And I see you put your picture on there, so maybe it had to run, grab something, or
I was going to say, looks like both of them may had to put on pause.
all right. Commissioner Cume.
I think for me, and anything that helps me better ascertain like what exactly we can influence, I think would would be a good start for me. Um, I think primarily I would like to know if like there is a path by which the commission, especially the subcommittee, can help influence changes, like even if we're not the ones overseeing it, if we can be influential in the initiation of changes to the law. I think understanding how much say we have in that would be really helpful for me, because even if we don't, then at least I know, and we can just maybe, I guess, focus on more internal policies and see what's possible there, but just kind of gauging what exactly we have influence over.
Okay, David.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate Commissioner Coombs' question. This has come up before, and it may have been early in the process, and it may have just been a conversation with the core commissioners initially. From my perspective, I think it's very much within the scope of this commission to make recommendations recommendations to state law that may require changes at the state level. I think that is within the bounds and the scope of this commission, because I think it's an important recommendation to the city if the commission is saying that to adequately address use of force, it really does require, based on this commission's recommendation, a change in state law. Obviously, there's lots of work that would have to go into that, and the state doesn't take what Salt Lake City wants and just implement what Salt Lake City wants, particularly with, statewide implications. But I think that doesn't matter in terms of the commission and what the commission may recommend in terms of for Mayor Mendenhall and for the city council. We advocate for changes in state law all the time based on what our needs are within Salt Lake City. And so I think that falls very much within the scope of the commission, Commissioner Coombe. Josh, and may I maybe offer a thought on some of Commissioner Coombe's questions and Commissioner Shiflett and Johnson's questions about the use of force.
Absolutely.
The district attorney, following, I believe it was following the Carville Hall shooting and the ruling, his ruling, the district attorney came out with a series of recommendations for, I believe, mostly changes in state law, and they were somewhere in the realm of around 20 something recommendations. And I would, if my memory is serving me correctly, some of those do tackle use of force and maybe even the disconnect conversation that the commissioners were having. And I just wonder if there would be value to this subcommittee to ask either District Attorney Gill or one of his lead staffers to present those recommendations to this commission and to this subcommittee for discussion, to even just understand what are some of the realms of possibilities or conversations that you all may want to think through in your recommendations to the city.
I would be open to that. I think that could be helpful.
Okay, so yeah, that's something we can look at. Also, David, what I hear you saying and to address what Commissioner Kuhn was saying regarding like exactly what can we influence. So just like internal policies and implementation of that, or might we be empowered by the city to be supportive of legislation that aligns with the mission of the commission? Then,
in my humble opinion and perspective from the mayor's office, I think this commissioner's work incorporates both of those arenas, both internal policy, and I would even say policy outside of Salt Lake City Police Department. There may be city policy, like, for example, within human resources. I just use that as an example, that may also impact some of the issues that this commission is tackling. So obviously internal policy ordinances to the city is definitely within the scope, and I believe influencing the city's position around legislation and the need for changes at the state level. I do believe that is in the scope of this commission.
all right, excellent. Commissioner Kuhn, how does that resonate with you? What are your thoughts?
I think that makes it what's the word? I think I feel a little more hopeful.
I'm just wondering, David, Commissioner Kuhn, how might we bring this up in full commission meeting on the 6th? Is there a recommendation or some way we can frame it to capture what you're saying in that and address that influence or scope of influence that we're seeking to empower the commission or support the commission at the level you're speaking? Because yeah, it doesn't sound clear. I know it wasn't before, and might be helpful to just put that out there. and clarify like what scope of influence they have and what level of support. And maybe we can pull that together as we move forward. But what are your thoughts on the broader discussion with the full commission and clarifying that scope of influence?
Was this a question for me or?
David, sorry, maybe I froze or I saw him, his face caught for a minute, so maybe he froze out.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. I thought it was a clarification for the commissioners. I think it's good clarification with the broader commission. I think there's obviously Salt Lake City, when we're talking about our own internal policies and when we're talking about our own internal ordinances, have more direct influence on making changes at that level. But I think the conversation that the commissioners are bringing up highlights that in the realm of policy that we're talking about, the type of change that the commissioners want to see and the community wants to see as reflected in these conversations can only go so far when you're only talking about internal policies and city ordinances, and may necessitate change at the state level. And that's where I think, again, it's definitely within, and hopefully the commission feels empowered to make recommendations. And sometimes recommendations may be made that we don't know whether it would require a change at the state level or not. And that may be part of the implementation and the review that the city itself will have to do in terms of implementing some of the recommendations. But where there is a clear nexus with state changes in state law, again, I think it empowers the city, I think, to have the commission saying or making those kinds of recommendations to incorporate that into our policy strategies with the state.
All right, excellent. Thank you, David. So we can craft the recommendation from the commission to the commission then to discuss and talk about making to the city about empowering the commission to take a position on legislation or other initiatives that align with the mission of the commission or that seek to effectuate change at the root. All right, Stephen.
Josh, I'm sorry, I had to take a call. I'm still at work. I see you had asked a question. I didn't get what you had asked, but I would like to ask a question. What influence does the CRB have? And what authority does the CRB have? Who would have that information?
Well, yeah, there was some of that discussion last week on the flow chart and their review.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Certainly be able to speak to that, but by ordinance, they're given a charge, and David can expound on this, and us have access to information and data. So I guess I'd ask follow-up, Steve. Why are you asking that? Is there a piece of that maybe the commission would want to access data at that same level, or?
Well, I'm asking because what if I had interest in being on the CRB? I know there's a background qualification that you'd have to go through and complete, but I'm asking because what if I wanted to be on that CRB? It seems like the CRB has a lot of leverage, and they've got the authority to make some type of change. Where I mean, the commission might be at the background of that.
All right, David.
Commissioner, I think it would be great to probably to also make sure we get clarification from Rick Rasmussen, who was in attendance last week. But my understanding is with the CRB, they have a lot of leverage and authority, particularly when it comes to investigating particular incidents. So anything that's referred to, as Rick mentioned last week, anything that goes to the internal affairs, any complaint to internal affairs, also is reviewed by the Citizen Review Board, and they make a ruling on whether they're looking at policy. They make a ruling on whether policy was followed or whether policy was violated, and they can make a recommendation to the chief of police on a course of action, discipline. That is not binding. That actually was an issue that was up at the state legislature a couple of years ago, that restricts, in general, citizen review boards from requiring the chief of police or a sheriff, in the case if there's one at a county level, from the CRB mandating the discipline. The legislation leaves that ultimate decision to the chief of police. But what Rick Rasmussen also mentioned last week, separate from their role in investigating specific complaints, they also have influence around and leverage around policy changes and training recommendations. And there wasn't, if I recall last week, Rick did not have any specific number of times or examples of changes at the police department based on that, but he did talk a little bit with the commission about some anecdotally on changes that have come about from CRB review. And so they do have influence and can make specific policy recommendations as well, internally.
Thanks, David. That was just what I wanted to hear.
Okay. You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks, David. So it sounds, Steve, what you're getting at is, yeah, how are they empowered? What influence do they have? How are they effectuating change? And is this subcommittee and commission at that level? And if not, how can you be?
Exactly. Because it sounds like they've got a lot of leverage. I'd like to know how many times they've made a recommendation and that's actually followed. I know David said that I think the police chief had the final say so, but how many times do they make a recommendation and that's actually followed? That would be nice to know. But it seems like they've got a lot of leverage, and that's where it seems like they've got the ability to affect change in real time on policy. I mean, looks like we got to go to the source. I mean,
yeah, so I think that goes back to that first recommendation on the question on, an NDA or what can be done to give the commission access to data, right? Commissioner Shiflett recommended a survey. Might there be existing data that might be sensitive, but as commission members you can access that would help you assess internal policy and implementation of it and make better recommendations. It sounds like that's what we're getting at. All right, so very good. I'm glad we've had this time to check in, and Commissioner Kuhn, you started off by saying, I guess I should be candid, and I appreciate that. And Carol and Steve as well. Like, candor is important. I know there's been a lot of questions and a lot of information in a short period of time, but this candor and feedback as we pivot to, okay, to take it then at that next level, that candor is critical, or we're not going to get to where we need to be, or aspirations you guys had coming onto this won't be fulfilled. So I appreciate the candor, and we can craft those into some recommendations to talk with the full commission about moving forward. David, anything else before? I know we're 5 minutes over, but you can also feel free to call me, email me. We're just not limited to this 1 hour as we're moving forward. You know, we'll be rolling out the public facing side of this, and we'll have other channels to communicate and gather data on community sentiments and beliefs and feelings and thoughts on this as well. So this can feel like this can be a frustrating process, right? It can feel messy. That's what iterative processes feel like. So I appreciate the candor and want to make sure we're moving forward and getting to where we need to be. It's a 4x4 relay, right? Not a sprint, not a marathon, but appreciate it. So we'll craft from this meeting some of those recommendations and share them with this subcommittee before we present them and prepare the agenda for the meeting on the 6th. And then if anything else comes up in between, we can talk about it. So that sound good? Anything else from Steve, Carol, Ephraim? Commissioner Carol, sorry. I don't know if I'm old enough to call you Carol, or it needs to be Commissioner Carol.
I think you might be, but I don't want to assume that. I wanted to thank Commissioner Coombe as well, because you articulated everything that I've been feeling and thinking and wondering, you know, why are we here? It's just getting frustrating. So thank you for being young and being so outspoken when we talk about young people and their outspokenness, and sometimes it just goes overboard, but you're right on.
I'd like to echo that. Coombe was amazing.
Oh, you get a call him just Coombe. All right.
I'm an old man.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, he has a right to do that. He can do that. He's an old man.
Thank you.
I'll just call him President. All right. So we'll put together the notes and put them into recommendations, run them by you before we submit them. And I'll talk to MJ as well. He wasn't able to join, but we've had some discussions, and so appreciate your time again, and we'll keep it going. So thank you.
Thank you.
David, do you have a second?
Thanks, Josh.
All right. I'm going to stop.